Hello, I'm Askar Sherlief and you're watching the news from Kazakhstan. Emergency at Kazakh-Chinese border. Burnt remains of 13 people were found at the checkpoint Ark-Khan-Kergen in Almaty region. This was reported on Thursday during a special press conference in Astana by the leadership of Border Protection Agency of the country. The circumstances of the incident are not being disclosed, referring to the fact that investigation and search teams are still working at the emergency site. The lack of official information is creating speculation around the incident. More details in the next report.
The border incident of this kind is the first for Kazakhstan. Burnt remains of 13 bodies were found at the checkpost Ark-Khan-Kergen in the Ulsharaysk district of the Almaty region. Their identity, what exactly happened, and how this is even possible at a protected location. These questions remained without answers during the special press briefing. At the moment, we found the burned remains of 13 people, including the body of a hunter who worked nearby. The Border Protection Agency forces, National Security and Internal Affairs are carrying out an investigation and search operations right now. The briefing only confirmed the emergency did take place, as it was earlier reported by several news agencies. In the morning, the news of the terrible discovery at the borderland made headlines around Kaznet. People offered different theories of the story: arson with the purpose to conceal murder, hazing going wrong, and sabotage by Chinese border guards. Some users even saw a political trace in the incident. Supposedly, someone might benefit from disrupting the upcoming SCO summit in Beijing and distorting Kazakh-Chinese relations. The MPs also learned about the borderland emergency from the internet. They were visibly shocked by the news, but asked reporters not to rock the boat, suggesting to wait for the end of the investigation. I believe the appropriate authorities will sort things out, so we should not jump into conclusions, as that will only generate more rumors. I think it is premature to talk about murders, hazings, or worse, the treacherous attacks on the border. Indeed, the appropriate authorities eventually released some information, for instance, that weapons were found at the location of the incident. Unfortunately, the scarcity of presented data generated even more questions, the answers to which might not be coming soon.
On Thursday night, Almaty residents could feel earthquake shocks of magnitude 5.7 at 3:20 a.m. in Almaty region. The epicenter was near the Kokpek village, which is around 150 kilometers from Almaty. During a special briefing in the city administration, the heads of emergency agencies declared that no victims or damages were reported. At the same time, on May 30th, the Seismology Institute and its Special Forecast Commission insisted that from May 31st to July 6th, no earthquakes were expected in the region. Find out to what extent the people were prepared for the emergency and why the emergency sirens were off from the next report.
This video was taken with a mobile phone by an Almaty resident. Like many others, he was awakened by an earthquake of a 5.7 magnitude at approximately 3:30 a.m. on Thursday. Many people fled their homes to the streets, anticipating aftershocks, yet not everyone was ready for the emergency. Well, when we got out of bed, it sort of stopped. Then we calmed down. I thought this was a siren of an ambulance, and then after the earthquake shock, I got scared. I live on the 9th floor, and of course it was terrible. Well, the first shock was very strong, then the second was a bit weaker, and it lasted for about 2 minutes. I have all of my documents in one bag, which I keep in the hallway. I think if we have an aftershock, I'll just grab this bag and run outside. According to the MES, immediately after the first tectonic quake, the tremors repeated at least 8 times. The U.S. Geological Survey was the first to confirm the quake, although it appears it was not dangerous to the population. In Almaty, for instance, the alert sirens didn't even go off. The local administration office reported at the morning meeting that the sirens are non-responsive to earthquakes of such magnitudes. The earthquake did not cause damage to the infrastructure of Almaty or harmed city residents. According to the MES, the earthquake epicenter was located 150 kilometers from Almaty, near Kokpek village, at the depth of 15 kilometers. As a consequence, the electrical substation went out, and several streets in the village were left without electricity. No property damage was reported. The epicenter lies within the immediate vicinity of Bartoghay Dam and Moynak hydroelectric plant. However, their survey confirmed no rising of the water level in the nearby lakes and rivers. There are no seismic stations in the area around the Moynak hydroelectric plant, whereas the regulation says that such important locations must be under constant seismic monitoring. Almaty residents still remember the earthquake of last May, the strongest in the past 50 years. A series of aftershocks near Lake Kapchagay caused damage to several villages. Over a year, 9 earthquakes occurred in the region, and more will follow, say seismologists. Thus, the emergency pack might be a good idea after all.
On May 31st, Kazakhstan is commemorating the victims of political repressions. A special monument was erected for the occasion in the capital, and President himself talked about the tragic period of the Great Famine. A little later, another district of Astana witnessed the first sanctioned protest action of dissenters, remembering the victims of Stalin's repressions. The first event emphasized that the mass deaths of Kazakhs should not be politicized, while the second gathering could not escape political connotation.
A dark blue suit and pink roses against a black wall. Nursultan Nazarbayev is unveiling yet another monument, this time the monument to the victims of the Great Famine of the 1930s. The president says that the tragedy took about 1.5 million people in Kazakhstan, and then adds a few words about Stalin's repressions. The cruel policy of the Soviet regime led to hunger, deportation, and the death of people. The main culprit of repressions was the inhumane and totalitarian system. The Wall of Sorrow was erected at the intersection of Respublika and Abay avenues. It featured a group of sculptures with a child and a woman raising her hands in the center. A few hundred people attended the presentation of the monument, including foreign guests. The opening ceremony was included in Astana's cultural program for the leaders of world and traditional religions that arrived the day before for their convention. In another part of the city, oppositionists and dissenters talk about the ongoing repressions that occur in modern Kazakhstan right now. The first authorized rally after December 16th was attended mostly by real estate investors and mortgage holders. There was also an OSCE representative as a bystander. Activists demand to be included in the decision-making process and a fair trial on Janauzian events. Today's rally is legitimate. It was sanctioned and authorized by Astana Administration Office. Therefore, I appeal to all who attend the rally to behave themselves peacefully and freely. It did not take long for the gathered to feel themselves at home. In less than half an hour, some were hiding in the shade, others conveniently laying on the nearest lawn. About 6 dozen protesters at once have transformed into a passive crowd. However, the key opposition leaders are still full of optimism. Walikhan Kaysarov is confident that such people are also capable of rebuilding the country. There were only 7 delegates at the Second Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party back at the end of the 19th century, and a very famous man among them said, "My God, how the small group of people is going to change Russia?" And yet the country has been changed less than 20 years later. I would refrain from saying that there are not enough people and that they cannot change anything today. Even conditional peace has not been reached on the last day of spring in Astana. The opposition continues to compare Stalin's repression with the actions of the current regime, while the president calls to take in the history and not to politicize its participants, at least those 1.5 million people who died from famine.
In the southeast of the country, the political victims were commemorated with the flower-laying ceremony and minute of silence at Janalik Memorial. Among the gathered were state officials and pro-governmental public organizations. More details on the event in the next report.
На этом месте 75 лет назад были расстреляны 4,5 тысячи человек.
4,500 people, including residents of Almaty and Almaty region, were executed here. Men and women, people of different nationalities and age, fell victims to political repressions.
Мы приехали, чтобы почтить память своего деда, также его соратников алашардинцев.
We have come to honor the memory of my grandfather and his comrades at Alash Orda party. My grandfather, Ahmed Baytursunov, the leader of Alash Orda, Marjan Jumabayev, Khalil Dosmukhambetov, and other intellectuals who dedicated their lives to the struggle of independence and freedom of Kazakhstan are all buried here. My grandfather was arrested on February 15, 1938, and we assume that he was executed approximately at that same time. He was sentenced to death under Article 58. We think that he was buried here. Many people came to Janalik Memorial with pictures of family members who fell victim to repressions. In most cases, these pictures is the only thing left of the executed grandparents. The information about this mass grave was revealed by Adiliyat Association, which was first to publish lists of people executed and buried at Janalik. The memory of victims was commemorated with a minute's silence and a prayer.
ألف لام ميم.
The ceremony has been held for already 10 years, and traditionally officials give key speeches during the event. This time, the memorial was attended by poet Mukhtar Shakhanov, the former Secretary of Security Council Tuligan Zhukev, and representatives of Zhaltoksan Party. Notably, Almaty Mayor Ahmedjan Yusimov, who never skipped the ceremony, was nowhere to be seen this time, and his deputy spoke instead. We remember the people whose blood was shed in the years of Stalin's repressions. We are shocked by the brutality with which the innocent were killed. The best sons of our people, who gained their fame for their intelligence and talent, were unjustly killed by the wheels of the repression machine. Now, this place is marked with a memorial complex Janalik. In the center of the composition is a fragment of an interrogation cell. It serves as a message to the future generations that repression must not happen ever again.
In Taraz, the official flower-laying ceremony to the monument of political repressions ended with detentions. Police used force and detained 4 activists of Alga political party. Their posters that showcased the arrested politicians, photo and video cameras were all seized. All the actions of the police were recorded on mobile video of Alga activist Damitkin Jarulkasynova, even though her phone was seized as well. All 4 were sent to the police station, where they were detained for 3 hours. The equipment was returned, however, all the recordings were deleted.
I shot everything with my video camera. When the girls were brought to the detention room, the policemen started twisting my hands. They took away my video and photo camera. Timur Bolatbekov, a police colonel, was the one who took it from me. I'm now requesting a protocol for the confiscation of my equipment, but I still can't get it. They're now trying to charge everyone under Article 371, Part 1. I intend to ask for the meeting with the head of the Internal Affairs Department, an email to the Interior Ministry regarding police disorder. I'm also going to write a letter to Mass Media Minister and seek an appointment with the regional prosecutor. I will send a complaint to take the issue to court.
One of the activists intending to take part in the action in honor of the Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Political Repressions, Georgy Arkhangelsky, was forcibly brought to court on Thursday, immediately prior to the rally. Plainclothes officers served Arkhangelsky his writ at his home. He had just enough time to explain that he is called to the case regarding an old dispute.
So this is done to prevent me from taking part in events. I'm surprised by this efficiency. It is clear this is done specifically 1 hour before the rally. I don't know why it is done. We were just given orders and came for you. Arkhangelsky believes the subpoena was issued to prevent his presence at the National Security Detention Center. The day before, he was also detained by the prosecutor's office and was given a warning about possible consequences in case if he appears at the wreath-laying ceremony on May 31st and at the dissenters' rally on June 2nd. Arkhangelsky, in turn, reminded the prosecutors about the 1997 presidential decree that established May 31st as the mourning day for the victims of Stalinist repressions. During the press conference on the 22nd, I said, as a citizen of the country, and especially because I have family members who are victims of repressions, I will be there at the ceremony. And I also call upon other people who are not indifferent to the events of 1937 to come to the rally. To be precise, we specifically talked about wreath-laying at the press conference, and that's what we announced.
The wife of Vladimir Kozlov, leader of the unregistered political party Alga, Aliyat Rusbekova, arrived in Aktau on Thursday. She maintains that the politician may be physically and psychologically pressured. In spite of hurdles from the authorities, Aliyat took part in the flower-laying ceremony to the local monument of victims of political repressions, even though prior to that she received a notification from the prosecutor's office stating that she will be deemed the organizer of any event she takes part in. In order to make sure that Vladimir Kozlov is alive and well, Aliyat Rusbekova intends to secure a meeting with the head of the detention facility and receive authorization to visit her husband.
The trip takes 2 weeks, so they should have been here in Aktau by now. This is why I came here, to make sure that they are alive and sound. I wanted to try to see him because there are many rumors around that he has been subject to some physical and psychological pressure. This is why we will demand to meet with the detention center warden and write petitions to investigators so that they permit this meeting. Several human rights activists participated in the wreath-laying ceremony along with Kozlov's wife. In Aktau, the monument to repression victims is a stone that was installed back in 1998. According to activist Tokzhan Kizatova, this was done as a formality while repressions in Kazakhstan became only stronger, added Yerlan Kaliyev, a member of Zhanaozian 2011 International Committee. In today's Kazakhstan, these repressions became even more perverted and cynical. That is, it has never happened before that law enforcement agencies were simply shooting their own citizens like dogs. If, for example, the Stalin regime avoided these formalities and openly stated that it never was a prosperous democracy, it was a dictatorship specifically, whereas today these horrible things are done under the mask of prosperous democracy. We believe it is our duty to come today to the monument to victims of political repressions, but unfortunately, as it turned out, Aktau does not have such a monument. The location was marked a while ago, but only because the authorities needed to report about completing a specific task. The president gave that task, and so the stone was installed here back in 1998. Today we decided to come here and hold a moment's silence.
Prosecutors' warnings notwithstanding, public figures and opposition is gathered in the square in front of the former NKVD building in Almaty to lay flowers and pay tribute to victims of Stalinist repressions. Present-day political prisoners were remembered as well, namely those who were sent behind bars or went under surveillance for their views in peacetime.
The execution cells of People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs were located deep underground below this park. Hundreds of people have come here on Thursday to lay flowers and pay tribute to the victims of dictatorship. The authoritarian system exists regardless of time and borders. Opening fire at oil workers in Zhanaozian and torture of prisoners, these are the signs of history repeating itself, public activists say. Disgraceful trials are now underway in Aktau, and people who were shot at are now charged. They fell victims to the repressive system. The authorities are to blame. Rather than taking care of the people, they are committing crimes against them. Activists are holding the pictures of Vladimir Kozlov, Serik Sapargaly, Azhangula Mirova, Vladimir Kuramshin, and Aron Atabek. Their detention and attempts to accuse some of them of social hatred are clear signs of repression and persecution. The public is certain now that repressive measures have become common under Nazarbayev's rule. The people who have gathered near the symbolic stone of political repression victims in Almaty are worried that reporter Jean-Bolot Mamai and theater director Bulat Atabayev might soon join the list of present-day political prisoners. Despite being called for questioning in Aktau, Atabayev does not lose his sense of humor. I don't care about the criminal case brought against me. I don't feel I did something wrong. Fear needs to be overcome with humor, so we need to retain it. There's a joke. If you're going to be raped and there's nothing you can do to avoid it, just relax and enjoy it. As for me, I'm not going to relax. I'll keep resisting, and I'm not going to play by their rules. Political prisoners had to play by the rules in 1937. Lucia Agbotina has been carrying a public enemy stigma throughout her life. Her father, Khalil Agbotin, a communist and Bolshevik who had remained loyal to the party, suddenly became a dissident for having thoughts of free Kazakhstan. He was arrested on the day of his daughter's birthday and then executed in 1938. The name Agbotin was first heard from Saken Seyfulin. Unable to withstand brutal tortures during interrogation, he said that Khalil Agbotin used to cherish the dream of making Kazakhstan an independent state. 3 members of Agbotin's family fell victims to Stalin's repressions. Her father was named a British spy, and the uncle was executed for collecting money for a mosque renovation. It was not until 1957 that Lucia received a post-mortem note of her father's political rehabilitation. Her mother keeps the memory of her only prison date with her husband in the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. My mother went to see my father, and she could only see him through a tiny window where a hand could hardly fit. Through that window, my father passed her a tooth wrapped in a piece of paper. He lost it during the interrogation, which forced him to confess to being an English spy. In the 1940s, the families of political prisoners were not allowed to communicate with each other. Those who dared to disobey were punished severely. But even now, only a few can speak of victims under Nazarbayev's regime. Many of them gathered near the building of the former People's Commissariat: mothers, wives, associates, and colleagues. Personality cults have always been accompanied by repressions. Stalin was glorified and people were killed then, while Nazarbayev is being glorified and people are being killed now. The monument to Nazarbayev was erected in the President's Park, while Kozlov was arrested and Zhanaozen residents were killed. How can a chairman of the Association for the Victims of Political Repressions propose to enhance the cult of Nazarbayev, a present-day Stalin? Despite warnings received from the prosecutor's office, public activists still managed to get their message across on the Memorial Day of former political prisoners. When memory fades away, tragedy repeats itself. Activists say they addressed their message primarily to the authorities.
Representatives of the Kazakh Communist Party, Akjol and Duratan political parties' youth branches laid flowers not to the monument of victims of political repressions, but to Turar Ryskulov's statue. He was repressed in 1938 on the count of high treason, terror, acts of sabotage, and participation in counter-revolutionary activities.
We could have attended the ceremony at the monument to political victims, but we wanted to gather the youth here. We wanted to educate them a little, tell them about the history and Turar Ryskulov, and of course we always remember about the monument. The three parties' branches brought about 20 freshmen to the wreath-laying ceremony. The leaders explained that they could not bring more students because of the final busy time. However, the young people could not even explain why they were there and what is the significance of May 31st. Many senior officials died on this day. On this day we got rid of Galashekin.
The memory of Kazakhstan's victims of political repression was honored on Thursday. Members of Kazakhstan's dissenters movement arrived in the Russian capital and met in the Vagnyankov's graveyard.
Two prominent Kazakh dissidents brought flowers to the monuments for victims of political repressions of the 1930s at Moscow's Vagankov Cemetery. Independent journalist Lukman Akhmediyarov, who was brutally assaulted in Uralsk over a month ago, and a well-known radical artist Kanat Ibragimov, jailed twice for taking part in unsanctioned dissent rallies, are visiting the Russian capital for different reasons, but both decided to join their colleagues for the commemoration of political repression victims.
Rest in peace. Kazakhs and Kazakhstan will always remember you.
A short prayer, memories, and talks about Kazakhstan citizens executed during the 1930s were followed with harsh criticism of the current authorities, which are no longer compared with the Soviet government. Sons of the Kazakh nation who were killed in Moscow during the 1930s are resting here. I also want to say that the oligarchic and fascist regime of Nazarbayev is now showing its ugly face. People are persecuted even during Memorial Day for the victims of political repressions. The ceremonies of laying flowers are dispersed and people are arrested with force. The fact that we are here is symbolic because right now it is not safe to mark the Day of Political Repression victims. Unlike her fellow civil activists, the organizer of dissenters' rallies in Kazakhstan, Bakhajan Taligozhina, came to the monument on Thursday not only for ideological reasons. Her presence here is deeply personal. We received a letter that said our grandfather was politically rehabilitated and buried at the Vagankov Cemetery. He was arrested in December of 1928 and later executed. Officially, he was an enemy of the state who fought against the policy carried out at the time. Taligozhina's grandfather, Dilmuhamed Adilev, was the director of the National Theater in Kızılorda. He did not fight openly with the regime, but was simply not happy about it. This was enough to arrest him for being politically unreliable. Ironically, Adilev's granddaughter followed in his footsteps. She is not happy with the current regime, and the feeling is mutual. After I served my 15 days in jail, the date of the rally was moved from May 2nd to 31st, so I thought that I am no longer in charge of the rally organization. That's why, being an active member of the dissenters movement in Kazakhstan, I am not in the country on this day. Instead, we decided to visit Moscow for personal reasons, as well as to get Lukban some medical treatment and honor the memory of Kazakhstan citizens executed in Moscow.
Participants of the events of 1986 also paid tribute to the repressed. Aside from those who died in the Stalinist 30s, the Decembrists also remembered victims of the Kazakh Youth Action in Almaty. Activists laid flowers to the monument and said prayers on the street of the same name.
During the December events, 1,700 people were severely beaten, more than 5,000 were interrogated by the NSC. According to eyewitnesses, about 100 people died. In 1991, the December event participants were amnestied. Gulbahram Junis went to the Almaty Square on Thursday and sadly states that even though the authorities have given an official assessment of the tragic event, there is still no appropriate law provision on the status of Zhaltoksan movement members. There is no special law on the participants of Zhaltoksan movement. We do not have benefits or privileges, even at the basic level. We have people with disabilities and they have no medical perks.
The civil action in honor of the Day of Remembrance for Victims of Political Repressions was held under the motto "No Future Without Lessons from the Past." The action began with the attempt by its members to stop unidentified persons from filming the event.
What right do you have to film here and why are you telling them to stay? Who are they? Tell us. After arguments with the unknown cameraman, civil activists proceeded with their peaceful assembly. In addition, they wanted to take part in the city commemoration of the tragic anniversary, but were not being invited there. This is why Semey activists laid flowers in a separate ceremony and expressed their opinions about the current situation in the country, also mentioning Zhanozen events and labeling them as repressions. The most important repression in Kazakhstan right now, which we still cannot comprehend, is what happened in Zhanozen. Nothing like that has happened before, even during the Soviet times, when the authorities executed their own people.
Victims of political repressions were commemorated on Thursday in Pavlodar. Civil activists honored their memory with a minute of silence and expressed hope that the terrible past will not repeat itself.
Political repressions, torture, threats, blackmail, all these are the tools used by the regime today to stay in power and cow the people. The ceremony at the stone in place of which the monument was supposed to be installed a long time ago was attended by civil activists and city residents. All their activities were carefully monitored by the security officers. The participants were holding photographs of those who they believe are the victims of the present-day repressions: Vladimir Kozlov, Ayzhangul Amirova, Serik Sapargali and Mukhtar Zhakishev. According to the event participants, the authorities have not learned any lessons from the past, continuing to persecute the dissenters. We were hoping that this would be a life lesson for all the states, so that this never repeats in the future, but the history shows that, on the contrary, such situations still happen in our times, even though we would like this not to happen ever again.
This is all we have time for now. Thank you for watching and goodbye.